Hello everyone, I'm Cchavi Vashisht. I'm an educator at Unacademy platform, and here I've come up with another lecture on social exclusion and inequalities in India. This is in continuation to the poverty and deprivation lecture that I had taken earlier, and this constitutes your general studies paper 1 topic regarding society and social issues. So we'll discuss today in continuation to what, as I already told you, of the poverty lecture that I've already taken. If you have not seen that lecture, I would request you to go back and see that lecture so that you get a better understanding of how poverty is related to social exclusion and inequalities in India, right? Because these go hand in hand. Nothing is exclusive of each other, but they are inclusive and they go hand in hand with each other, right? So the structure of the given class is I have written the sub-themes over here. The first, we'll discuss about the definition and forms of social exclusion. Then we'll look at the definition of inequalities. Within that, there are two forms of inequalities, that is economic inequalities and social inequalities. Then we'll look at the Oxfam India's inequality report. Often you get in your prelims examination what is the name of a particular report or what was the key features of that particular report. So this is one topic that you can get in your both prelims as well as your mains. Then reasons for inequalities, consequences of these inequalities, and which sustainable development goal addresses this. It is goal number 10. We will see what are the provisions written in this and what governments can finally do to act to fight inequalities, because in the end, being in civil services, being in appearing for UPSC, you have to be very solution based. You have to look for rather than looking for problems, rather than looking for dysfunctions in society, you have to look for solutions. You have to be very solution based, a positive person who is ready to solve the current problems and who sees that in future things can be better. So that should be your approach in general for your UPSC as well as for your life, right? So what governments can do to fight these inequalities. So let us look at the first theme that we need to cover. That is, what is social exclusion? It is in contrast to social inclusion. Social inclusion means it is an attempt where you try, where you're included in the society, you're part of the society. And exclusion is completely opposite of it. That is, an individual is cut off from the full involvement into the wider society. And this involvement from the wider society is sometimes voluntary and sometimes by force. So this can be out of people's choice that they want to be excluded from the society, or out of force that they are pushed out of the society and pushed out of the basic provisions of the society. Broadly, when we understand social exclusion, we often tend to have a very narrow understanding of social exclusion where we look at only the push aspect. But I would always recommend you to have a very comprehensive understanding where this push factor can sometimes be a pull factor also, right? In migration theories, we do push and pull theory, right? So we tend to often see that migration is often a result of 90% of the cases being push factors. And there are 10% pull factors. So same, you apply the concept here that there is social exclusion. 90% of the social exclusion is forced, but 10% can be voluntary also. And if you can think of an example, let me just tell you one, and then you can think of more examples. For example, sadhus. Sadhus in India, they voluntarily exclude themselves or they voluntarily are cut off from the mainstream society. Similarly, you will find residential segregation, where people deliberately keep certain sections of the society outside to maintain their particular class and status. So these are the examples where people are excluding themselves out of their choice, out of their will, rather than a forced exclusion. Right. Now let us see the forms of social exclusion. The first one is the labor market exclusion. As the term itself suggests, we are looking at the economic exclusion, where a person or an individual is not getting adequate income, is not getting equal income, or he is not even able to get opportunity to work, opportunity to employ himself or herself. So it is a labor market exclusion. You're excluded from the economic activities or the labor activities. Then it is service exclusion. Service exclusion, this can be of two kinds. One can be the individual. How an individual is excluded from the mainstream society or from the basic access to services. For example, power, water supply, transport, financial services, how an individual is implicated. And this exclusion, if it becomes collective, that is, how a particular community is excluded from a particular services. You must have seen that often in the outskirts of villages or towns, you will see that certain communities do not get complete access to power, complete access to transportation facilities. Or sometimes, you often must have heard of this news that, a particular groom was not, a groom of a particular caste was not allowed to ride the horse because they are excluded from this exercise, right? So one can be your individual exclusion and the other can be your collective exclusion. Then exclusion from social relations. Social relations in the sense that when an individual is unable to participate in the common social activities. For example, sometimes an individual is excluded from voting. If you see the latest example, Rohingyas are excluded from voting rights, excluded from taking part in political activities or being part of the political activities in Myanmar and even in India and in other parts of the country because they have a statelessness position, right? Or also in terms of your civic engagement, like getting yourself involved in other electoral purposes, or this exclusion being out of the result of a disability because of your caring facilities that a woman has to provide, so they are excluded from the activities which are normally being part of the everyday life. So this is broadly a exclusion from social relations, and the worst form of exclusion is homelessness. That is the worst case scenario. You are out of your permanent residence and you may not have you don't have access to your basic services. So in totality, your social exclusion is economic, where you're excluded from the labor market. Then it is services, where you're excluded from the civic and cultural and social engagements. Then social relations and the state of homelessness, right? You see the street people, they don't have access to any resources. They are largely cut off from the mainstream society, right? Then comes inequality, if I'm not wrong. No. Yeah. Okay, so what is inequality? Cambridge defines, one thing I often tell students is please learn certain definitions, at least the definitions of the topics which are mentioned in your syllabus. This is something some of the students who are listening to me for a while now, who are listening to my lectures for a while now, have understood and have started learning the definitions. But every one student out there who's listening to this lecture must realize that once you introduce your question with a definition, you're giving a perspective to the examiner that you have read the topic and you have an understanding for the topic. So it is the best introduction that you can have. For GS, we often say that, any current development or any current fact report from which you can substantiate, you can start. But definitions are the perfect way to start your answers. So how would you define? Cambridge defines inequality as the unfair situation in which when some people have more opportunities than the other people. So it is a sense of deprivation, a sense of inequality in the society. United Nations have also defined it, and it defined it in a more simply term that it is a state of not being equal. And this not being equal is in terms of your status, your rights, and your opportunities. So any definition you can choose and you can learn that particular definition. See, in the narrow sense of the term, we usually understand inequality in terms of your wealth, concentration of wealth. That is the economic inequality. But when you read about inequality, you eventually understand that it is not just the economic inequality, but the broader perspective that you need to build in your understanding, that it can be social, it can be political, or it can be terms of better opportunities. So it is a whole lot of broader perspective that you need to develop in terms of inequalities in the society, and not just a narrow perspective of economic inequality. But before we go forward about the reasons and what was the Oxfam report, I would like to bring in here what is the meaning of economic inequality and what is the meaning of social inequality. The term economic inequality, it simply means that something which can be quantified, something which can be calculated, a form of inequality which can be quantified, which can be calculated. Obviously, your social inequality cannot be calculated. It cannot be quantified. The depth of it can be understood. A perspective, a subjective understanding of it could be, got brought out into the picture. But economic inequality is something which can be quantified, right? And economic inequality, how do you define it? It refers to how economic variables. See, if you realize, I often during my lectures underline only the keywords. This means, in short, that in the examination also, you don't have to underline the entire sentence, but only the keywords, right? So this is just, if you just start training yourself while making your notes, you underline only the keywords. In the similar fashion, you'll be able to write your mains examination. So always keep training yourself for these practices, right? So this is one thing that I feel that really makes a lot of difference in your mains examination and answer writing, is that when you're writing your answer and you underline the keyword and not the entire sentence, it will make a whole lot of a difference to the examiner who's checking your copy. Because then, on the face of it, your answer becomes very visible, very much in a way that you're addressing the demand of the question. Right? Coming back to the point of economic inequality, something which can be quantified, something which can be calculated. And how do you define it? Economic inequality refers to how economic variables are distributed. That can be among individuals in a group, among groups in a population, and among countries. So it can range from individuals to countries, and how these economic variables are distributed. Right? You often see, middle income countries, low income countries, rich income countries. So all these are range of inequalities of economic variables that you see. Now, the most predominant form of inequality are measured in terms of income and wealth. How would you define that? Your income inequality is the inequality and disparity in terms of your income. And your wealth looks at same, but in terms of your wealth. So I thought, maybe there is a chance or a probability. Just 1 minute. There's a chance or a probability that you may not know what is the difference between income and wealth. So I've put it here so that you get a clear understanding. Income is something that you receive from your pay, that is out of your employment, your wages, your salary, bonuses, your investments, such as interest on savings account, and dividends from the shares of stock, savings, state benefits, pensions, and others. And rent. What is your wealth? Wealth is the total amount of assets of an individual or a household, and this includes your financial assets, such as bonds, stocks, property, private pension rights. Right? Now, when you will look at the reasons, you will see that one of the reasons for income, for inequalities in India is that we have zero wealth tax. And this is something that which was highlighted by Thomas Piketty also. Problem is this, somewhere you can equalize. You can still see that, persons who are, individuals who are working hard, individuals who are trying to do 2 jobs or 3 jobs, they're somehow trying to get up in the hierarchy. It is the wealth which is more widely undistributed. I'm not saying here, please don't understand this in a wrong way. Income inequality, for example, when we talk about gender, we see that women are paid less income in terms of vis-a-vis the same work performed by men. There is income inequality, but income inequality is a gap which can be bridged over the period of time. If we have correct policy measures, if we have correct schemes and programs, we can bridge this gap. But we need to start taxing this wealth income. And this is something which was suggested by Thomas Piketty also. Right. Now, development theories have been largely concerned with inequalities in terms of your standard of living, in terms of your income, wealth, education, health, nutrition. And therefore, whenever you talk about economic inequality, you're focusing on 2 key aspects. The first one is your inequality of opportunities. That is, you don't have access to equal education. This is the starting point. आपके पास opportunity ही नहीं थी, इसलिए economic inequality आई. That is the starting point. And then there is inequality of outcomes. Now, inequality of opportunities, you can say, to bridge this, we have reservation policy, right? And inequality of outcomes in terms of your material dimensions of human well-being, such as level of income, education attainment, and so on. What is the outcome of your program? What is the outcome of your situation, the scenario in the country. If there is inequality in terms of education, what is this leading to? Right? So one, it is the inequality of opportunities, and the other is the inequality of outcomes. Right? Now this is about the debate that equality of opportunity exists when life outcomes depend only on factors for which a person can be considered responsible, and not on the disadvantageous attributes outside their control. This basically argues that your gender, ethnicity, family background, they should not be considered or determined when you're determining your outcome. But in practical terms, we realize that all these positions, social positions of an individual, your gender, your ethnicity, your family background, they all have an implication in terms of your access to resources. And equality of outcome describes a state in which people have similar economic conditions. Now, when you have created equality of opportunity, for example, in terms of your reservation policy, then you can say that the outcome of it is equal. You have given similar economic conditions to everyone, and therefore the outcome will be equal. Right? Now, it is very important that whenever you're writing your answer, you substantiate. That is the key point that you need to take into consideration, that anything you write in your mains examination, you either substantiate by in the brackets by putting a name of a study, by putting in a name of a report, a thinker, a scholar. This is not just about your sociology option or any option that you're doing, but in general about your everything that you write. You need to substantiate. If you're writing there are economic inequalities in the country, how? You have to give one or two examples. So here I've given you a set of 4, 5 examples. You can choose anything. The most easiest one to learn is the top one, that 1% of the top 10% of the Indian population holds 77% of the total national wealth, right? And 73% of the wealth generated in 2017 went to the richest 1%, while 67 millions are those who comprise of the poorest of the poor, right? Or you can talk about the number of billionaires in India, and within this you can also highlight gender inequality in terms of how many women billionaires are there in India. Let us keep this task for you to find out. If I am not wrong, the number of billionaires, women billionaires in India, I think there are only 4, right? Out of the total 119, there are only 4 women billionaires, right? So this highlights your gender inequality, right? So this way you just learn 1 or 2 examples to substantiate your point that there is economic inequality and how this economic inequality exists. Right. Let us talk about then the social inequality. Social inequality occurs when the resources in a given society are distributed unequally. And typically you're talking about in terms of allocation, which engender specific patterns along the line of socially defined categories. अब social inequality ऐसा तो नहीं है एक individual के against होती है. Basically these are done according to your socially defined categories. You have categories in terms of caste, right? General, SC, ST, OBC, right? You have categories in terms of class, you have categories in terms of gender, you have categories in terms of ethnicity. So what is all these? These are socially defined categories, and within this, how resources are unequally distributed, you have to study that, right? In differentiation of preferences of access to social goods, we study up in terms of power, religion, kinship, prestige, race, ethnicities. All these are socially defined categories on the basis of which you see inequalities in the society, right? Now, the report, the most important report, latest report 2021 by Oxfam. What is the key theme of it? It talks about the unequal healthcare story. In these COVID times, you know that access to healthcare was so much unequal, so much limited. And you can take it down that this might be the health topic, can be a part of your essay, can be a part of your GS paper 1, can be a part of your GS paper 2, as well as your optional. That how healthcare was implicated in these COVID times, and what is the underlying story that you need to identify. COVID-19 has implicated everyone, but how it has implicated the poorest sections of the society,
right? So you need to understand that healthcare was not equally accessible for everyone in the COVID times, and in general also what are the problems of the Indian healthcare system. So the new Oxfam report, it provides a comprehensive analysis of the health outcomes among the different socioeconomic groups. Again, when you're talking about different socioeconomic groups, you see it in terms of the socially defined groups to gauge the level of health inequality that persists in the country. Now, growing socioeconomic inequalities are disproportionately affecting health outcomes of the marginalized group due to absence of universal health coverage. Since the independence time, we are talking about a universal health coverage, but yet it has not been implemented. And the reasons for it can become a part of a separate lecture, but we are not going into the details of it. But what was the outcome of the report? The report stated that general category performs better than SC and ST, Hindus perform better than Muslims, the rich perform better than poor, men perform better than women, urban population is better off than rural population. Right? Now, sometimes you will feel that this is so common. We all know that general performs better than SC, Hindus perform better than Muslims. So what is different? Right? Difference is whenever you will write this and you substantiate by stating that this is the outcome of your Oxfam report, it becomes a point for substantiation, right? It becomes a valid point. It becomes a relevant point. Then, within that report, it is stated that healthcare is a luxury good. The COVID-19 situation has exacerbated these inequalities. A very common and a very often talked about topic that the public healthcare spending is lowest amongst the world. In the pace of well-funded healthcare services, we are promoting the powerful commercial health structure. Public healthcare is less, and we are promoting the private sector. And this is something very, a contradictory situation where India is considered as a destination for medical tourism. Many of our states suffer from higher infant mortality rates, more than what sub-Saharan African countries face. India has 17% of the global maternal deaths and 21% of the deaths among the children below 5 years. And just to add to this, India is also the top country in terms of malnourished children. So all these points suggest that despite being claimed to be a destination for medical tourism, our healthcare system, our healthcare infrastructure is very poor, and it is not equally accessible to all the socially defined groups. And what are the reasons of these inequalities? See, I have given you the key words. Whenever you write in the examination, elaborate on them. The first point is inherited wealth and invested capital. I told you just a while ago that Thomas Piketty has argued that since India has a zero wealth tax, it is a major reason that India's wealth is unequally distributed, and this unequal distribution is not being taxed. It is not reaching to the government, and then government could use it for the betterment of the people. So one of the solutions that Thomas Piketty gives is that we should start taxing our wealth. Then let's tax to GDP ratio. There are terms, again, focus on the terminology. For example, the terminology is tax avoidance, right? Or negligence in terms of paying your tax. You चोरी करते हैं ना टैक्स को, भरते नहीं है, इनकम जीरो शो कर देते हैं, इनकम किसी से कम शो कर देते हैं. All these are very common things that you will find in everyday people. Whenever they're filing returns also, they'll just make sure that they show a lesser income and they do not fill tax. However, this is when you have a less tax to GDP ratio, then you're not able to contribute to the welfare of the society, right? Then there is a relation between economic and non-economic inequality. For example, if there are wage discriminations, which is an economic inequality, this results into the non-economic inequality. Why? Because you can see that this gender inequality of wage has further implications on how women will have access to your resources, right? Poverty, malnutrition, hygiene, housing, all these are implicated when you have economic inequality. Governance deficits. Most common, and something we all write in our answers, we all mention in our classes, is that India suffers from a problem where government's ability is reduced. They're not effectively able to tackle the problem of income inequality or wealth inequality or social inequality. There are governance deficits. When you talk about income inequality, there is black economy, there is corruption, there is crony capitalism, and so on. Right. Then public spending. You must have heard that Andhra Pradesh talks about two things when he talks about the access to resources and to how to develop the capabilities of individuals. He talks about health and education. Right? If you have not read about Andhra Pradesh in terms of this developing this capability approach, not Andhra Pradesh, I'm sorry, it's Amartya Sen. It's Amartya Sen on how you develop your capabilities. And sometimes you just sociology, gender studies, everything gets mixed up. Yeah, Amartya Sen has talked about capabilities approach, and within this approach, he highlights of two things. One, you need to develop your health system, and another, you need to develop your education system. So the public spending on your health and education, again, we all are aware of, India has a very less percentage. In the independent, post-independence, in the initial years, we had targeted 6% for education. But till now, we have not reached that target. So you can see in the span of more than 50, 60 years, we have not even reached the target we had set in 1950s. Right? Then the situation of the economy. What is the situation of the economy? Sector-wise performances you need to see. Agriculture is predominant. There is jobless growth. There is informal sector. Female labor force participation is declining. All these are examples to state that our status of economy is very weak, very vulnerable, and therefore there are more inequalities in the society. Clear? Now, inequalities hai. We understand there are inequalities in society. But what are the consequences of it? These consequences, you will not write it randomly like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or ye tum bana do list 10 points ki. Rather, divide it into 3 broad headings: economic, social, and political. And within that, you can write 3 to 4 points. So when we talk about economic inequality, we look at how there is a cost of opportunity. People do not have equal access to opportunities. Then you can talk about the how there is a monopoly of certain corporates, monopoly of certain individuals that you can mention with respect to your Oxfam report. Then you will see that certain states are performing better. There is a divergence in state performance, and certain states are performing in poor terms. Right. So all these are examples of economic inequality, and you will see that the consequence of economic inequality. And you will see that this is leading to often a trend that is anti-globalization stance in the country. People are saying that we should be more Atmanirbhar. It is good to be self-sufficient. You have to promote the policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which Prime Minister Modi has given last year. But globalization is something which is talking about sharing of, moving across of resources, moving across of time, space, people, everything, for the benefit of the countries. And we have benefited from globalization. So this anti-globalization stand can sometimes be bad for the economy. Then social consequences. Again, this inequalities in the society. This leads to cumulative effects, cumulative social effects. There is exclusion, there is discrimination, and this exclusion and discrimination can sometimes lead to unrest and crime. In sociology, we often read a topic that is social exclusion and its relation to crime. How these two things are related. I will not go into the details of it, but when an individual is excluded or discriminated and they do not have legitimate means, access to means, then to reach the goals, they adopt illegitimate means. This is a theory which is also stated by Merton, one of the classical sociologists. But when you are talking about exclusion discrimination, अगर आपको directly कोई चीज़ मिल नहीं रही है, तो कभी कभार आप indirect way से भी लेते हो ना, illegitimate way से भी लेते हो. So that leads to unrest, that leads to crime. People are facing inequality. They may resort to protest. They may resort to criminal activities. Then this exploitation and deprivations, certain sections of the society are more vulnerable vis-a-vis others. For example, women. And this implicates their opportunities and this implicates their participation in the country. Another example of this social consequence could be residential segregation, which I said earlier also. Then political. Now, if there are inequalities in the society, that would undermine the democracy because your public confidence is threatened. you can see that there are inequalities in society, and you can any way or any time be a target of this inequality. So this threatens the public confidence, and this threatens the democracy, and this also somewhere impacts our social spending. And for example, certain parties adopt to populist responses, appeasing certain sections of the society and not the others. So this further creates inequalities and further forces the political leaders to adopt appeasement or such tactics, populist measures to divide the society. वो देखते हैं ना हम लोग इलेक्शन के टाइम पे आपको मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम देखते हैं डिवाइड एंड रूल पॉलिसी चल रही होती है. Certain party is wooing the others, certain party is wooing the other sections of the society. So this leads to political divergences also. Now, which is the Sustainable Development Goal that addresses this? It is Goal 10. It talks about reducing inequalities and ensuring no one is left behind and are part of the integral process of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, you see that inequalities are there within and among countries, and this is a cause of concern. You are seeing certain positive sides, for example, inequalities in terms of income, it has been reducing, but still wider inequalities persist. And COVID-19 has further deepened these inequalities. It has hit the poorest, it has hit the most vulnerable sections of the society. And if you just put it in a spotlight, your economic inequalities and the social safety nets are worst for the poorest sections of the society, for the vulnerable sections of the society. And sometimes this is not just the economic inequalities, but also social and political. For example, Rohingyas. You would not classify them as economic inequality, but social inequality and political exclusion. That leads to the problems. Then on the economic front, COVID-19 has increased global unemployment. It has dramatically slashed workers' income. You have seen, cut in the income, unemployment rate increasing, female labor force participation decreasing. Then COVID-19 has also put at risk the limited progress that has been made on gender inequality and women's rights. Also, in terms of your political rights, for example, democracy has been threatened in terms of COVID-19. This is a topic which I'll be taking in a few days' time, on how democracy is understood and how it is impacted during these COVID times. Right? Inequalities are also deepening for vulnerable populations in countries with weaker healthcare system and those facing humanitarian crisis. The worst hit are refugees, migrants, because of course they're not getting access to healthcare facilities, as well as indigenous people. For example, tribal people are not ready to get their vaccinations done. Older persons, people with disabilities, children, and people are particularly at risk, which are left behind. Now, reducing inequalities within and among countries. This is one of the chart papers that I have derived from the United Nations web page. They have talked about how before COVID-19 there was income inequality, but this income inequality was falling. And after COVID-19, implications are that the most vulnerable will be the hardest hit. And this is the section that they have made. There could be a global recession. There is a global recession. For example, currency rates have dropped. Import-export have dropped. This could squeeze the development aid to developing countries and lead to problems, right? Now talking about the solution. What governments can do and how governments can fight these inequalities. There are certain things that whatever you have read till now, whatever you have understood till now, you will address these problems. You will say that if we address these problems, we can have a solution. We can fight these inequalities. So the first one is you deliver universal free healthcare, education, and other public services. Again, if you go back and see Amartya Sen's argument of developing the capabilities, if you have equal access to health, if you have better access to education, you can develop your capabilities. So the first standpoint is, आप healthcare do, आप education do, so that people can develop. We should stop supporting the privatization of these public services because privatization leads to inequalities. Certain sections of the society can pay for it, certain sections of the society cannot pay for it. So the public services, that is health and education, should be equally available, freely available to everyone. Then provide pensions, child benefits, and other social protection for all. and design all services to ensure that they deliver for women and girls. Second, women contribute a larger section of their time to the unpaid care activities. And because of this, their participation in the economy is limited. Their participation in the social and political activities is also limited. So one of the suggestions given to reduce the inequalities is that free up this time. Ease this working hours for women and invest in public services. For example, when you talk about women, they spend hours to go and fetch water from faraway places in villages. Then in terms of electricity, in terms of childcare, if you reduce the time which is given for these unpaid activities, unpaid work, you can help women to contribute to the economic participation, social and political participation, and thereby fight these inequalities. And third, end the under-taxation of rich individuals and corporations. I just told you that one of the reasons for inequalities in India is that we do not tax wealth, and there is tax avoidance also. So those of you who can come in the tax bracket, they are also not ready to pay their taxes. They also try to adopt unfair means to avoid tax, to not pay tax. So what you can do is eliminate tax avoidance and evasion of corporates and the super rich. You have often seen that in news also we see that, tax avoidance is one of the major problems. Our tax to GDP ratio is way less. So all these are examples, all these are solutions to fight the problem of inequality. One thing I just wanted to add here is that you can write it in your notes also, that Thomas Piketty, who has written the book, I've referred to him 2-3 times, during 2016-17, I think 17 he had visited India, or 2016 he had visited India, and he's one of the famous economists. He had suggested a few solutions for Indian economy, and he has written a book, Capital in 21st Century. There are 3 solutions that he has given. The first, tax to GDP ratio, which is only around 11% in India, this should be increased. For example, in countries like United States, in Western European countries, this is almost equivalent to 30 to 50%. So that our target should be that we are able to increase this tax to GDP ratio, right? Then second, he suggested that India has a zero wealth tax. We should try and have a wealth tax over the individuals and the families. And third, the public health spending, which is merely 0.5% of the GDP. We should try and increase that. For example, China has almost 3%. We should try and at least reach that percentage so that we can reduce our inequalities, right? So these were the examples. And then if you want another report, not just the Oxfam report, let me just give you one more report here. It is the World Inequality Lab report. World Inequality Report. This had come out in 2018 by World Inequality Lab. Which is based in Paris, Paris School of Economics. And this has talked about how this inequality has increased since the liberalization times, that is since the late 1980s. And this inequality, which increased during the liberalization times, is very different, or is in contrast to the earlier inequality, because inequality had earlier dropped under the socialist regime. So this talks about how inequalities have increased in the post-liberalization times, and we should tax the rich people, and that should be our agenda, that you have income tax correctly implicated and correctly targeted, and you have wealth tax correctly targeted. But to address this income inequality, one must look at providing the social goods. Again, something Amartya Sen has also said, we should provide social goods, and these social goods are again education and health, right? So these are the points of inequality and how governments can solve the problem of inequality, and the major reports and thinkers I have told you that you can mention. So that is all. You can use the Unacademy platform to refer to new special classes
and the comprehensive course on sociology. Praveen Kishore sir and I take a comprehensive course on sociology, and you can use the code NICEIS to avail a 10% discount on subscription charges on any of the Unacademy course that you wish to avail. Right. So this was all about your class on your lecture on social exclusion and inequalities in India. If you have any problem, any doubt with respect to that, you can ask in the chat box. I will address that. I can see a few comments here. Speak slowly. So I have now completed the class. Next time I'll be careful about it. I don't have the PDF to it, but what you can do is that you can listen to the video again and write down your notes. See, one thing I always recommend, your name is Preetham. Preetham, it is very important that you should understand that you are appearing for mains examination. You're preparing for mains examination, and there you won't have access to this digital technologies and all the things. You have to write by your hand. So make notes by your hand, let your hand develop that memory, and that would be a more better approach to write your mains examination rather than taking out a PDF and then just underlining it. So I would recommend you just go back, listen to this lecture again, and make your notes simultaneously. And from next time, I'll try to be a little more slow. Usually in my student days also, and often students says that they listen at a speed. वो YouTube में एक option होता है ना 1.5 and 0.5. So I always have this tendency to listen at that speed, and therefore somehow my speaking skills are also a little fast in terms of in comparison to other teachers. But yes, I will try to control that because I have a habit of speaking fast. Right. Thank you so much. I hope this class was interesting. It was of use to you. You can use this class in your essay writing. You can use this class in your GS paper 1, GS paper 2, as well as sociology optional, right? In sociology optional, you will need to write a little more thinkers, for example, Ruth Lister and all. But for your GS, you don't need more thinkers. Thomas Piketty and these reports are more than sufficient, right? All right, then. Thank you so much for being part of this class, and hope you have learned, and I'll look forward to more classes with you all. Thank you.